Now, after immense pressure from the African National Congress, South Africa's President Jacob Zuma finally yielded and ended his 9-year tenure with his resignation from office. The Deputy President, Cyril Ramaphosa, is now charged with salvaging the legacy of the party. Bismarck Rewane joined us earlier to discuss how this changes the dynamics for South Africa's business relations with West Africa.
Under the current administration headed by Zuma, we saw a lot of xenophobic attacks, particularly between Nigerians and South Africans here. In your view, what do you think he could have done better to make Africans more jovial together?
Typically, at the time we had these xenophobic attacks, you could see that both the Nigerian economy and the South African economy, coincidentally, were in a recession. Typically, after a recession or before a recession and during a recession, you would find that citizens who are challenged in terms of income per capita and in terms of unemployment resort to xenophobic activities. This happened in Germany before the Second World War. It happened in Italy also in the run-up to the Second World War. Typically, economic desperation is followed by xenophobic activity and then political instability before the recovery. And what we are seeing today, both in Nigeria and in South Africa, and to a large extent in parts of Europe, is that the xenophobic narrative, which led to the anti-immigration stance, both even in the United States and in Europe, are beginning to give way as economic prosperity begins to gain traction across the world.
Mr. Rewane, it's Chris Bishop here. One thing I'm interested in is, what do the business community in Lagos, what do they think of Cyril Ramaphosa? A lot of store set by him here, but what are people in your town thinking of him?
Well, the way we see it, we think the business community in Nigeria and the Nigerian public see the transition of the ANC from a liberation party, a liberation movement, into a political party, now into an institution for governance and not only conflict resolution, for actually laying the foundation and the acceptance of a mixed economic model rather than a controlled economic model. You could see that the ANC served its purpose as a liberation movement. It served its purpose as a representative of African identity and the unions. But now that time is over. What is required today is an economic management model which can make South Africa, just like in Nigeria, competitive, both globally and domestically.
What about trade between Nigeria and South Africa? I mean, what do you think the hopes are now? What do you think Ramaphosa's approach will be to that trade?
Well, Ramaphosa has been the chairman of, he's worked, was on the board of MTN, board of Helios, and so he's quite familiar with the business community. He's familiar with the challenges, both in these companies that have presence both in Nigeria and in South Africa and across Africa as a whole. So it won't be, I mean, his mentality will be both as a former union leader, but also as a board guru who understands the challenges of investment. And what has happened is that essentially South Africa has lost its competitiveness, underinvested in infrastructure, and everything was dominated by political conflict. I think that time is over, and you will see that the markets and investors will show a lot of confidence, including intra-African trade, which is between an investment between Nigeria and South Africa. Nigerians are very comfortable with Cyril Ramaphosa, and we think that in this day and age when Nigeria itself has accepted a mixed economic model, Nigeria is moving towards a more market-oriented economic policy. This augurs well for both South Africa in the first place and Nigeria as its partner.
I mean, Bismarck, not too long ago, Nigeria had put up a statue of President Jacob Zuma. Then that was met with huge backlash. I'm interested in your view on how Nigerians are feeling now that the former president has resigned.
Well, it was one state out of 37 states, a state called Imo State in Nigeria, that put up a statue. And for whatever reasons, Imo State felt that Jacob Zuma was a role model and a hero. But that view is not widely held across Nigeria. That same state had actually set up a Ministry of Happiness. And so you have extreme views, some from very rational and some to the most irrational. So I wouldn't use the statue of Jacob Zuma in a small, innocuous state in Nigeria as a representation of the Nigerian view of Jacob Zuma.
So, Bismarck, I mean, another point is, how much surprise is there, you think, in Nigeria that the amount of flack that President Zuma got in his latter days, public lambasting from his people, and also the fact that he actually did, in the end, stand down without so much as a whimper?
I think it's important. One thing we should understand is that we are seeing even the liberation movements that became political parties and the enthronement of what we can call benevolent despots of modern age Africa all going away. Robert Mugabe has left, Dos Santos in Angola has left, Jacob Zuma has now left. I think most African countries are now accepting that even incumbents can lose power. And I think that is key. And the lessons to be learned here is that no matter how strong you are or how capable and how charismatic you may be, in the end, it's always the economy, and not just the economy, but the impact of the economy on the ordinary lives of people that matters. So there was a lot of talk about corruption, but more than anything else, it is the ineffectiveness and the inability of the Zuma government to come through so that the masses could benefit from the economic recovery that, and the corruption scandals. All of that put together was what was responsible for his downfall. For us in Nigeria, there are lessons to be learned because Nigeria also has a problem of corruption, Nigeria has a problem of ineffectiveness, and Nigeria has some governance problems. So there are lessons to be learned, and I think that the government in Nigeria will actually learn from this and ensure that they can also begin to deliver economic goods to the people, not just in terms of positive data, but more important, in terms of impact, creating opportunities for people and income growth at the same time.
And Bismarck, I mean, a number of South African companies are in Nigeria, from the telecom sector like MTN, our banks are there, our food companies are there. I mean, not as many Nigerian companies are here in South Africa. And I'd just like to find out from you, I mean, your message to Ramaphosa to make it easier for foreign companies like those in Nigeria to do what South African companies are doing, to go outside and find growth.
Well, I think what you are representing is correct, but to a large extent you'll find that even some multinationals, let's take the multinationals that are in Nigeria, including Diageo, Heineken, and others, who are essentially also in South Africa. So there's that segment. Secondly, there are Nigerian companies now like the Dangote Group who are also investing across sectors. But more importantly, the Nigerian indigenous business community are first strategy to fill up the demand gap in Nigeria in terms of import substitution and being competitive. Then secondly, the focus is on the West African region, ECOWAS, where Nigeria has a competitive advantage in terms of comparative advantage in terms of transportation. So you'll find that the Dangote refinery that is coming up in 2020 will be able to satisfy both the needs of Nigeria and the rest of Western Africa. So the hub status and the cluster status would suggest that we'll focus on West Africa. But at the same time, there are African indigenous conglomerates like MTN and others who are also who have presence there. Ramaphosa's coming on board means that he will understand the challenges of operating across and cross-border investments. He would also encourage and send incentives to Nigerians to also invest in South Africa, essentially opening up the South African market to some competition and cooperation between Nigeria and South Africa and other African countries for that matter. So I think this is a new dawn as far as Africa is concerned, because you have somebody who is respected by the liberation movement and the unions, also who is actually equally respected by the business community, both domestically in South Africa and regionally in Africa and internationally in the international financial community.
That was Bismarck Rewane, CEO of Financial Derivatives.